We are the builders. We are the builders of the B17. With our hands 1,000,000 strong, we milled and drilled and shear and saw. We buck and rivet and blank and press and do 1,000,000 things with the 1,000,000 parts that create the flying fortress.
I am a carpenter.
I have 2 sons in the Army and 1 in the Navy.
My boy flies the fortress I helped to build.
I am a housewife. I'm the mother of 4 children.
My boy lies peaceful in Guadalcanal.
I fought in France in the last war.
My husband died in a foxhole in Bataan.
And I am a designer. I am only one of the hundreds of engineers who first conceived and built the fortress on paper. I'm only one of the thousands of Boeing workers who plan, design, and build the B-17.
Copper, nickel, tungsten, bronze, brass, rubber. From all parts of the world they flow into the Boeing stores. By freight, by truck, by air express, over the highways, over the airways, across the broad face of America, into the birthplace of the B-17. Bronze, iron, steel, long sinews of it, steel, iron, aluminum, from Arkansas, Georgia, Alabama, from Greenland, from the Guineas of South America, into the home of the flying fortress. Out of the earth it comes, gleaming aluminum, out of the dust. Strong hands of the miner blast and dig, bauxite, alunite, cryolite, and gems. Skilled hands of the chemist transmute the ore into gleaming white metal. Into the inspection room flow the small standard parts, rivets, riv nuts, grommets, washers, clamps, clips, spacers, cutters, all reporting for their physical. Fasteners, fittings, hinges, screws, brackets, pins, and nuts and bolts, all reporting for induction. By the hundreds, by the thousands, every bolt is examined. By the thousands, by the tens of thousands, every nut is inspected. Out of the earth it comes, glistening aluminum. Out of the rocks and clay, out of the dust. Busy hands of the worker give it a bath. The bath gives it an oxide coat, adherent to paint, resistant to corrosion. Out of the heat they come, strong sinews of steel to be cooled by quenching in a bath of oil. Like the blades of Toledo, like the swords of Damascus, the steel that flies must be tempered and true. The steel that flies must be cut and shaped, must be shaped and cut, must be milled and drilled and turned and formed, must be turned and formed into thousands of parts by 100 lathes, into parts for the mighty bomber. Glycol boilers that warm the fortress, cabin heaters whose complex machining and expensive tooling have been redesigned by Boeing engineers. Glycol boilers, things of beauty, weapons of war. Giant lathes, boring and cutting and shaping and turning, boring, cutting, forming, turning out parts for the B-17. End cutters, gear cutters, grinders and hobs, milling machines that mill and polish, cut and scrape, turn and shape, cutting parts, cutting time. Round and round and round they go, grinding out parts for the B-17. Shapers traveling back and forth, cutting plates to support the wings, turning the chips a brilliant hue. Hot they are, red hot and blue, as back and forth the shapers go. Shapers traveling up and down, shaping and forming, forming and shaping terminals for fortress wings. of machines back to back. Drill machines whose steel cuts steel. Twisting and turning and spiraling and boring. Rows of machines whose shiny spindles bore through steel with perfect precision. Multiple drills with spiral flutes, boring the holes in terminal plates, boring the holes in a pattern called war. Keller machines that cut smooth profiles, shaping the steel of a pattern called war.
But what about the sheet aluminum? What happens to it?
Let me tell you. First, it must be cut into required shapes and sizes. That's what we do in this department. We are the workers who cut and shear the cloth for the clothes of an airplane. We are part of the army of dressmakers to Her Majesty, Queen Flying Fortress. Over here are the routers which cut stacks of parts in one operation, turning 14,000 times a minute, cutting parts quickly into irregular shapes.
Out of the router it comes, brilliant aluminum, to be cleaned and pressed, welded and sawed, and to pass on to final assembly. Tools to sharpen the tools for the workers. Tools and machines. Machines and men, each playing a part in the drama of victory. Shearers and routers and hydraulic presses, modern Joshuas, with appetites monstrous, unsated, commanding the sun to stand still so we can have time to fulfill our promises. Huge monsters they are, forming parts for a part of a war machine. Plates and webs and seals and cords, blisters, retainers, angles and doors, cradles and brackets, stiffeners and vanes.
I press a button. Down comes the ram. Up goes the pressure to 4,000 tons. I press another button. Out comes the table loaded with all kinds of concoctions to give indigestion to the axis. It gives me a thrill to think. By pressing a button, my 100 pounds can boss thousands of tons.
Die that fits die, carefully shaped, controlled by a touch, coming together with terrific pressure, pressure that registers thousands of tons, forming parts for the fortress that flies, parts for the B17. Monsters, mechanical behemoths, playing with metal as mother does bread dough. Die upon die, squeezing with vengeance, squeezing, stretching, shaping, and forming, squeezing the axis out of the skies. Smaller but faster, mechanical presses, punching and blanking, speedily punching with accuracy, instantly, piercing steel or aluminum ceaselessly, stamping parts for the fortress by hundreds of thousands, speedily stamping, constantly stamping, endlessly stamping, stamping. Before the metal becomes part of the fortress, it must go through many machines. It must be rolled, long strips of it. It must be changed into 100 sizes, into 100 shapes by 100 machines. It must be rolled, huge sheets of it. It must be formed into 100 shapes. It must be cut and pressed and blanked and stretched and bent and punched in hands of the workers by the builders of the B-17. Out of the east they come, builders of the fortress. Out of the north and south, out of the Middle West.
I'm from North Dakota.
I'm from Iowa, where the tall corn grows.
We're from Missouri, and so is he.
We're from the bluegrass state of Kentucky.
From down under they come, builders of the fortress. From Australia, from Alaska, from the lowlands of Holland, the highlands of Scotland. All planning, designing, all working and building the B-17. From the new and the old world they come, men and women, old and young, brown and red, black and white, the Nez Perce and the Cherokee, the Polynesian and the Kanaka, the Nubian, Iberian, Hyberian, Caucasian, the Tartar, the Slav, the Czech, the Pole, from every state in the United States, from every nation in the United Nations, all planning, designing, all working and building the B-17.
A few years ago, the Boeing plant was the hallowed territory of men. Now, we women have penetrated into every department. But the men don't mind it. Even though we wear slacks and put our hair in snoods, we're still feminine and our fingers are nimble. Of course, the men still do the heavy work, like cutting windows in a cabin top.
In the welding department, we women also play an important part. We learn welding quickly. We feel at home here with all this gleaming metal. We call it the kitchen utensils of war.
Spot welding is another method of joining lightweight metals. When the electrodes are in firm contact, electric current produces heat. This hot contact causes the metal to fuse. Boeing tooling engineers developed the automatic spot welding table, a super-duper electric sewing machine that stitches the skin for the wings of the fortress. Meet the octopus, one of Boeing's many contributions to the war effort. Believe me, this octopus packs a real punch. Night and day, it punches V-shaped slots in the circumferential rings that brace the mighty bomber. In this shop, we assemble the heavy bomb racks which carry the weapons that will help to bring peace.
Here the small parts become parts of a part of a war machine and move on to final assembly. Like the jug under the potter's hand, great sheets of aluminum and strong sinews of steel take shape, forming long tributaries to the river of metal that rolls smoothly and constantly to final assembly.
Wood also has become a war weapon in the form of ammunition boxes, gunner's seats, ladders, doors, and bomber steps. Yes, sir, wood has enlisted. It helps to lighten the airplane and to conserve critical material. It flies and fights every day in the flying fortress. I used to be a spinner of dreams. Now I spin the things that are making those dreams come true. Gleaming parts for the B-17. I used to be an artist, painting pretty girls like petty girls. Now some of the things I paint are military secrets.
We too help build the fortress. We bend and form the tubing lines through which flows the lifeblood of the airplane. hundreds of feet of tubing in all kinds of curves and bends go into each bomber. To make installation practical, lines are made in small sections. This nimble-fingered girl, not so long ago, was dressing dolls. Now she finds it easy to put dresses on the oil and glycol line, an important installation that prevents loss of heat to engine and crew.
About 5 miles of electric wiring go into each bomber. 5 miles of copper nerves arranged in intricate patterns. It's our job to cut the wire and arrange these patterns. Using colored lines painted on wooden patterns, we follow the curves around pegs and make an entire intricate assembly.
The mighty bomber requires hundreds of feet of steel cable, hundreds of feet of tough steel muscles to operate the flight controls. The terminals become a permanent part of the cable, joined in the swedging machine.
The dorsal fin will soon help the Fortress crews to fly true to the mark.
The top gun turret will soon replace the picture in this frame.
These sections soon will carry the twin-tail guns, the deadly Stinger.
Bulkheads are the airplane's partitions, dividing the airplane into various compartments. This bulkhead, with its plates of true tempered steel, will help support the wings.
Riveters and drillers, drillers and riveters, builders all, pushing the throttle of mass production down to the floorboard, shortening the time to final assembly, shortening the road to victory. Out of the shops it comes, shining aluminum, out of the presses and shears, out of the saws. Strong hands of the workers have sheared and cut sheets and bars and channels. Busy builders working in jigs, building the bomber's body. The majestic sweep of the dorsal fin is known in many skies, spoken of in many languages. Its legendary silhouette casts a long shadow over the hopes of the Axis nations. Batteries of jigs filled with workers building wings for the bomber. Wings of gleaming aluminum. Wings for the flying fortress. Smoothly and constantly rolls the line, the multi-line of production. A frame for a pretty picture is this ring that supports the engine. Delicate in pattern, light in weight, with the strength of 1,000 horses. Like a fancy collar, the cowling is attached. Then it is fixed to the engine. Engines and engines, row upon row, intricate, beautiful, powerful. Mighty engines to power the fortress over the roof of the world, over the Solomons, over the Aleutians, over the Sahara and the Himalayas. Mighty engines to roar over oceans, over Tokyo, Berlin. wings created by hands, by 1,000 hands, and 100 machines. Wings to fly swiftly through the night, over the seas to the skies of the Axis. Mighty wings anxious to fly over the seas to the Axis skies. Constantly flows the line, the multi-line of production. Through shops and assemblies it rolls like a river, filling the gaps and filling the spaces with maximum output per man. Onward and forward rolls the line of mass production. Onward and forward the armament rolls. Armament for the bomber. Guns to protect the fortress. Busy hands of the builders installing democracy's weapons. Fitting, fastening, tightening, installing guns to protect the bomber. Onward and forward rolls the line, smoothly, constantly onward. We are the builders of the B17, with our hands 1,000,000 strong. We plan, design, we build and fit, and do 1,000,000 things with 1,000,000 parts that create the flying fortress. We are the builders from every nation in the United Nations, men and women, old and young, black and white, brown and red, the Nez Perce and the Cherokee, the Polynesian and the Kanaka, the Nubian, Iberian, Hyberian, Caucasian, the Tartar, the Slav, the Czech, the Pole. We are the builders. Ours are the hands that build the Queen, the B-17, the fortress that flies.